Hi, and welcome to the Healthcare CEO Show, where you'll find actionable insights on healthcare leadership from the best and brightest in the industry. I'm your host, Daniel Fernandez. Let's get a pulse. On this season of the show, we're focused on taking a closer look at the intersection of M&A in the healthcare industry. Joining me today, I have Jim Feinstein. He is the CEO of ENT Partners, and he brings with him over 30 years of executive healthcare leadership experience, where he's also managed acquisitions across multiple subspecialties. Jim, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Daniel. I appreciate it.
Now, before we dive into our topics today, tell us a little bit about ENT Partners.
ENT Partners is a private equity-backed physician practice management company that will celebrate its 6th anniversary on January 1st. We provide exclusive partnership opportunities to the otolaryngology, audiology, allergy, and sleep subspecialty areas.
Now, we talked a little bit earlier about you having over 30 years experience, and I imagine over those 30 years, you may have made a few mistakes.
More than a few, that's for sure.
More than a few. And with I always call them learning opportunities. I think kind of, the best of us do. We look at them as a way to grow. Over those years, are there any standout maybe mistakes or things that weren't necessarily going well that maybe you were able to view as an opportunity?
Certainly. I think one of the biggest mistakes or biggest learning opportunity was in another buy and build strategy, not in ENT, where the investors, management team, and physicians all agreed that transitioning to an enterprise EMR platform was in the best interest of the business from a patient, provider, management team perspective. And we were in a multi-state footprint. In one of our states, we had 3 or 4 acquisitions, and they all shared a similar platform that was built by a local physician. And they made a unilateral decision to make the transition and migration onto a major player's platform. We were subsidizing it, we were training, we were prepping, and we were providing the blueprint and the roadmap for success. Everyone was excited about it. It was a significant investment in time, money, and the opportunity was very exciting for all involved. We made the transition, we made the migration, and to this day, if there was 15 providers involved in that transition, I think I lost 15 friends. The grass is always greener. It doesn't matter how much better the platform was technologically. The user interface was different. The time spent with patients increased, and the revenue cycle was slightly impacted for a short period of time. That being said, we all made the decision together. Everyone was excited about it, but no good deed goes unpunished. And to this day, I share this learning experience regularly, and it's helped make better and different decisions presently and prospectively following that mishap.
Now, is it when you're evaluating these situations, what were some of the biggest takeaways, and how are you using them now?
Sure.
To make better decisions.
I mean, at the time, some of the takeaways, technological obsolescence was a concern. Were there going to be teams to support the software programs, the hardware programs moving forward? Was there going to be investment made in the platform that allowed for advancements in technology, and whether that was from a scribe functionality perspective or integrating mapping or imaging technology, et cetera. And so that was a big decision-making factor that went into the group approaching us to make the transition. And so I think when I exited that opportunity and started this new business, I wanted to use that learning experience as the catalyst for how we built the new company. And what we developed was an opportunity that allowed for physicians and or practices to maintain their existing platform and avoid the mandate to transition and migrate everyone onto an enterprise platform by building a cloud-based uh, data repository or platform, an analytics platform using a Power BI tool that would integrate into the individual practices and allow them to avoid or make the decision to remain on their platform versus experiencing the good, the bad, and the ugly of transitioning off of a platform.
Now, one of the factors of an acquisition or merger, however you want to call it, that comes up occasionally is personality differences. There are any situations where there, maybe it didn't go well.
Yeah, I mean, it's I've worked with physicians for 30 plus years, and they're very smart people. I think one of the things we've learned is that it's hard to argue with data, and if data is high integrity, then most of my discussions and or debates, we will err on the side of over preparation and having the proper data to support any discussion or decisions that need to be made. Anecdotal support doesn't go over very well with the wide range of personalities, but just like any other business, there's a wide range, depth, and breadth of personalities. 80% of the time, those complaints are coming from 20% of the production. Uh, but they're all important, and there's a reason why they're taking the time to provide that feedback or that complaint or concern. And we want all of our key constituents to feel like they have the um, accessibility and the responsiveness of a partner and or a management team to address those concerns. The ones that complain are typically aren't busy. So if we could keep everyone busy, I find my phone rings significantly less.
Nice. I love your approach to providing as much data as possible, especially when it comes to situations like that. I think that's very, very important, to try to remove as much emotion from the equation as possible as well. So I really do appreciate that aspect of it. We're very similarly minded when it comes to things like that. Try to make things a little more black and white and data driven, as long as the data is clean, as you mentioned. Dirty data is dirty data, and it doesn't add any value whatsoever. But understand that. There are many reasons why acquisitions fail. One of them is culture. You ever had a situation where maybe you were looking to merge cultures and it was challenging, and then maybe how did you overcome that?
Yeah, I think a lot of times when you're right, integrations are more important than acquisitions. What happens after the deal, to me, is more important than getting the deal done, because that's when the heavy lifting really begins. And I think that there's a preconceived notion that when you have a change of control, that the new owners or new partners are going to want to make wholesale changes, and some do in some circumstances. But our philosophy has always been spend the first X months assessing. You don't know what you have until you're living and breathing in that environment, culturally, operationally, socially. You really don't. And what I found is that when we acquire physician-founded practices, more often than not, there was a lot of with back of the envelope documentation or agreements, a little less formalized and organized of a environment or infrastructure. And I think we spend a lot of time making sure that we have all the information before we're making decisions, because philosophically, we want the employees who are instrumental in the acquisition not only to be satisfied, but to be engaged in their roles. And so we want them to feel like nothing was ever taken away from them from an acquisition standpoint, but their overall workforce architecture was improved upon, whether that's compensation, benefits, ancillary benefits, incentives, etc. This acquisition has to be an improvement for the employees, or you're going to trigger turnover, difficulties in recruiting, and that's something we can ill afford in this marketplace post COVID. It's much more expensive to recruit than ever, and the opportunity cost is so great, we'd rather spend the time taking care of our existing productive employees and team members.
Are there aspects of the when we're talking about the integration process and of course how it can fail? Are there aspects of the front end, like the due diligence stage, that may help to predict better integrations?
I think part of it is seeing, taking a look at the employee roster and the turnover that may or may not have taken place over a period of time. I think the other is one of the key elements in my mind is when the seller is comfortable broaching the subject with the employees. Because the longer he or she waits to bring them under the tent, and the closer you get to closing, the less time the employees have to digest and or ask questions. So there's a bit of a conflict of interest. They want to make sure that the deal is going to close so that they're not raising any red flags for people to potentially leave or look for other jobs, or think something's happening that's not in the best interest of the business, versus being too premature, bringing them under the tent, allowing them to ask questions, meet the buyers, start building relationships. So it's really a balancing act. And we try to impress upon the sellers to give us enough time pre-close to get in, talk to people. We're human beings. We're in the service industry. Relationships are so important. And and I think that's one of the bigger challenges during due diligence is getting the sellers to feel comfortable with the direct interactions with the key constituents who are not owners.
That makes sense. I always think of Meet the Parents, where he's talking about the circle of trust,
Yeah, exactly.
and a lot of people kind of keep the things close to the vest in the earlier stages. Do you think it's important to communicate early and often, or, I mean, at what stage of the process do you feel like it's good to communicate with certain individuals? I would imagine that early on you'd want to involve your leadership team because, of course, there's always a due diligence phase.
Well, we like to say that most deals die 3 times before they close. So if you once we've reached that third milestone of death, that the attorneys have been engaged and paid, and we've all made investments into paying our key professional service providers, that deal closing is imminent. And so I think once you get to that stage, it's not too early, but an appropriate time, whether it's 30 days or 60 days before closing, because there's a lot of heavy lifting that needs to be done from a benefits transition perspective, potentially payroll transition, and we want these things to be seamless. We don't want the employees to feel any pain as it relates to the actual transaction. So it really just depends on the size of the business, the number of employees, and what communications have, if any, reached the employee level. Most of these deals, they're the worst kept secrets. Someone finds out. There's a lot of people visiting practices. There's a lot of information and data requests coming from, a lot of report generation. People aren't stupid. So it's just, and that's another reason why we want to get out there early and often, is so that we can help justify and support the cause.
That makes sense. I mean, they can take a little bit and run with it. No question. A little bit of information can go a long way in the wrong direction sometimes,
Without a doubt.
without a doubt. Over the years, what are some of those, maybe the more common mistakes that you've seen?
Some of the more common mistakes, I think it is very difficult to replace production, um, given the decreasing residency programs and fellowship programs. Physicians are in a higher demand than ever, and I think if I had to do some things over again, I would err on the side of being a little bit more flexible with some of the employment agreements with physicians, not necessarily non-competes, but some more of the flexible work arrangements related to, you know, part-time versus full-time hours, etc. Um, Once you start digging a hole, it's difficult to fill and to get ahead of. But at the same time, I think it's important to treat each practice, each market, each physician differently, because even though they're practicing medicine in the same subspecialty area. There's so many variables that make the environment different and unique to the individual.
Agreed. Now, this next section is, I think on every single podcast, technology has come up, and specifically AI. So I thought to myself, I'd love to talk about market conditions and changing market conditions. So let me go to my crafty AI tool and ask it what it believes to be the top 5 market conditions that will impact, healthcare moving forward, specifically for private equity, backed companies. The number one thing that came up that will impact market conditions is an aging population and an increase in demand in healthcare services. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are, if there's 10,000 US individuals becoming Medicare eligible daily, and that number could be north of that, then there's going to be a continued strain on the healthcare system, and each subspecialty is impacted in a different form or fashion. In the ENT space, the aging population. When you look at head and neck cancer, the median age for a head and neck cancer patient is 64 years old. When you look at audiology services, um, whether it's hearing aid utilization or just overall decline in hearing, uh, that falls into that same demographic. Um, Other ancillary services aren't impacted as much necessarily from an aging population. Allergies seems to be more of an environmental variable that's impacting the growth in the allergy sector, but there definitely are factors in the aging population that keep our waiting rooms full.
That makes sense. The number 2 thing is evolving regulatory and compliance landscape. So this has a lot to do with, tightened regulations around data privacy, reimbursement policies, the adoption of value-based care models, and so on.
Yeah, well, I guess first and foremost, having the right counsel is extremely important. We picked on the attorneys earlier in this conversation, but obviously, partly in jest, having the right counsel, healthcare counsel that keeps a pulse on the changing and the demands of the regulatory environment is extremely important, and even more so when you have a private equity backed organization, and ownership structure. You have to take into consideration antitrust, Stark laws, the Self Referral Act. So it's an ongoing issue that we're contending with. It'll never get better, so to speak. We just continue. We need to continue to keep our pulse on it. And then, talking about cybersecurity, which was part of the comment as well, we're investing significant resources, time, money, and people to make sure that the data is safe, patient information is safe, financial information is safe, and you can't open a newspaper, and that's so to speak, or a web page without reading about the latest breach. And so we do a lot of testing internally, regularly, and training of our employees to make sure that they're uh, up to speed on some of the phishing scams and the emails that are requesting information. It's an ongoing process that will never end, and we need to do everything we can to keep the environment safe.
Yeah, one of the things we've seen an increase in, especially since we're working with a lot of PE-backed companies, if you're a PE-backed company, you're automatically a larger target, just because they know the money's there. And we've seen a lot more increases in web accessibility lawsuits, where they're going after the portfolio companies as well who are not complying with your WCAG standards and things like that. So because they know that they can attack the entire portfolio all at once, and it's all financially backed instead of supposed to going to some some smaller shops, which has been something that's been
Yeah, and I
interesting.
think that's why having sophisticated investors and sponsors who've been there and done that before, try to separate church and state, so to speak, so that their portfolio companies, don't overlap. in any way, shape, or form, with the exception of sponsorship. But I do think that, one of the elements that we touched upon earlier, which has really become part of our standard operating procedures, is performing a security risk assessment in diligence. That wasn't necessarily the case 5, 10 years ago. Um, but I, back to one of my biggest mistakes that overlaps this AI question, is that we acquired a practice that had an active intruder in their environment post close. And for those that aren't familiar, the responsibility of the owners of that business to contact the media, to contact the patients, to post ads, um, it is extremely expensive. Even if it's considered a breach, but not concluded as a breach, you have to respond as if it is a breach. So that being said, we start our security risk assessments before we even own the businesses and continue them on through our ownership period.
Smart. Smart. Which perfectly leads to what is determined to be the number 3 topic, which is technological disruption and integration. The adoption of technologies like AI, telemedicine, data analytics, it says, will continue reshaping healthcare delivery, driving operational efficiencies, and improving patient outcomes.
Yeah, I think, AI was such a cool buzzword, and I was just waiting to figure out when it was really going to impact our day-to-day clinic operations. And what we're seeing now is that there are software partners out there that can help automate some of the manual processes within the clinic and the daily operations of the business. And whether it's the referral process that helps take a snail fax hard copy that comes in through multiple referral sources or hospitals, and digitizes and automates that, and helps with the continuum of referral through scheduling of the patient. We'll see a lot more artificial intelligence getting involved in cleaning up some of the uh, let's call it terrestrial manual labor involved in the clinic operations. There's going to be some obviously intraoperative technology that we see, whether it's um, guided technological uh, AI software programs that will assist physicians intraoperatively. We're seeing that with some navigation systems within the sinus surgery environment, and I think that you're seeing that on the allergy side as well with some biologics. So it's touching both the operations and the clinic, as well as the uh, surgical suite as well, and I would expect it to continue to do so. There's a lot of smart people in the AI space.
There definitely are. And it's being brought up repeatedly by a lot of our guests as something that they need to keep an eye on and look for ways, to adopt it. You brought up the fax machine. I mean, is the fax machine ever going to die? When is that?
It's amazing that we're still talking about it. But if you look at the hospitals and the health systems, when they're referring and or communicating, a good percentage of those communications do come through the EMR portal. But from a referral perspective in the primary care networks, 80% of those referrals are coming in through fax, whether it's an e-fax or it's a hard copy fax. Uh, I think it's going to take a long time to get rid of that transmission option, but a huge opportunity for those entrepreneurs out there, and to take technology to the next level and incorporate some AI. But it's a problem, and it's a burden for private practices uh, across the globe that are still dealing with faxes.
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret that information has been siloed for so long, and systems didn't always talk the way they do now, and it's obviously continuing to change. So hopefully, in the future, systems increasingly talk more and more, and those integrations are in place. We can finally talk about eliminating the fax machine as we pretty much have with the Yellow Pages, right?
Yeah, it's as we see more consolidation within the hospitals and the health systems, I think it's a double-edged sword. It helps because then there's less systems that need to talk to one another, But if you're a consumer or you're a patient that may have providers within multiple environments, we're still seeing difficulties between those environments speaking. But that just gives us, one more login, one more password to put in the notes section of our iPhone.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that the pandemic was a kick in the pants to progress a lot of practices towards a more digital, at least environment than they were in the past.
Certainly.
Yeah. The fourth topic, it's no secret, and this is one of the other topics that's come up repeatedly. It is talent shortages in healthcare.
Yeah, I think it's post-COVID, we've seen a dramatic increase in turnover in the medical assistant position, as well as the shortage in terms of physicians and providers outside of major metro areas. Based on the comment I made earlier about the shrinking number of residency and fellowship programs, physicians and providers can choose where they want to practice. If they want to work in the major metro area, if they want to work in a warm climate, it gets more and more difficult to recruit into rural areas. Excuse me. So I think that recruiting needs to become a core competency for a lot of businesses like ours. We have full-time recruiters on the team. We're working with contingent recruiters and retained recruiters, and we have lines in the water for all positions across the practice every day of the week, whether or not there's an opening or not.
Yeah, and this is beyond even recruitment; it's retention. I would say because if you're hiring 10 people and 10 are going at the back door, you're at net zero at that point.
Yeah,
so,
it's not even net zero. The opportunity is so significant that you're actually losing money because the cost to recruit, the cost to replace, the cost to retain is significant. So you're right. Equally, if not more important, to retain as to recruit. It's analogous to anyone could be a great acquisition company, but can you be a great integrations company? What happens after the deal? What happens after you hire the people? Do you have the resources to train them, to onboard them, to give them the tools and resources they need to be successful long term?
Yeah, and honestly, this topic, the talent shortages, combined with the first topic we discussed, which is the aging population, is a bad combo. You have more patients and fewer caregivers.
100%. And I think it's more patients, less caregivers, and the caregivers are coming at about a 20% increase in cost post COVID. So businesses are now dealing with more tighter and difficult margins as it relates to the same business pre-COVID. So it's a challenge for medical practices and for our business to make sure we're able to maintain a high caliber and the right headcount to support the business and the growing business's needs.
Yeah, and you alluded to the increase in costs, and that ties perfectly into our final topic, which is the economic fluctuations and capital availability. It states that fluctuations in interest rates, inflation, the overall economic environment will significantly influence P deal structures, access to capital, and exit strategies.
Yeah, I think the last is the most important or the greatest impact to the equation, the exit strategies. As everyone knows, interest rates come down, multiples go up. So I think the biggest variable in that equation is timing. So for a lot of businesses that are looking to exit, it may delay exits or accelerate exits depending upon the macroeconomic environment. Thankfully, in our model, we have our investors are also our lenders. So we don't have any retail debt per se on the business. Therefore, access to capital has not been an issue throughout the life cycle of this business. That's not necessarily the case for a lot of others that bring on senior debt or are having difficulties meeting covenants. thankfully uh, we're in a healthy subspecialty area, and our overhead burden is aligned with our business demand. So access to cash to fund prospective deals is also easy to come by because our investor consortium has been there and done that and understands the value of having access to dry powder and to be able to continue to fund these tuck-in acquisitions in order to achieve the ultimate IRR that they're expecting.
Now, these 5 topics were AI generated. Do you think that there's any maybe it may have missed, or do you think that was a good synopsis of some of the bigger trends?
I don't never want to challenge AI.
Yeah,
Careful, karma, right? But no, I do think it's a pretty good high level summary of the key salient points that we're dealing with on a regular basis. Um, Other than that, I think the only thing that probably remains to be included is some of the psychology of the individuals as it relates to change of control or selling a business or choosing the right partner. I don't think AI is there yet. There's still we're in a service business, we're in a relationship business that the Elon Musks of the world are working on, but I don't think the robots will be able to uh, help us transact when it comes to that face-to-face interaction and the psychological leap of faith that the physicians that we're working with or prospective physicians we're working with are willing to take that step and say yes, because this is a business that they built from scratch and or that they bought decades ago, and need to be comfortable with taking that leap of faith and saying, I trust you, and I trust you that you're going to stay out of my clinic. I'm going to maintain clinical autonomy. You're going to make my life better because you're going to handle my headaches. You're going to make the environment operationally more efficient. And this is the proper transition and succession plan for me and my employees. I don't think AI has that down pat yet.
agreed, agreed. And our final 2 questions of the show before I let you go today, Jim. There's a saying that leaders are readers. Do you have a favorite book that you've read that you would recommend to the person on the other end of this show that's listening today that is in a similar position to you?
Well, I was an English major, so I do love to read. And I have lots of favorite books. I like to divide my reading into kind of personal pleasure reading and then personal development. But I think the last book that I read uh, that I found to be fascinating was Same as Ever by Morgan Housel. It's a fascinating read that really identifies historical events and how they impact present day trends. Um, he's a great storyteller, and it's a really interesting take on the psychology of money and financial independence using historical events. So I highly recommend that read.
That's a good one. My library is almost fully constructed of recommendations that I've received from others. So this is one I don't have on my list yet. We'll be adding to it after this show. Final closing questions. What advice would you give to the person listening to this show that is in a similar position to you? Um,
I
you
think
know,
three bits of I call free jewels of information, especially in healthcare. Surround yourself with smart women. The healthcare space is dominated by women, and there's a lot of smart um, women that have spent their careers within the healthcare environment that have made me a better leader and a better person in general. And what I found is that they're more comfortable challenging me, and that's I think what has lent to part of my success and growth and development is surrounding myself with people that are comfortable challenging you and not people that are just wanting to tell you what you want to hear. Um, and I think secondly, trusting your team and your advisors, um, making sure they're not afraid of making the mistakes. Uh, you know, I'm comfortable making an executive decision, but we all have to be comfortable with living with the consequences. And as we kicked off this podcast, understanding that learning from these mistakes or consequences are going to be more valuable than any of our successes. And I think finally, my own personal philosophy is it's really important that you treat people fairly, but not necessarily equally. And in business, people want to be treated fairly, but I think they understand that there's a wide range of contributions being made in healthcare, whether you're a physician, a medical assistant, a nurse practitioner, or a call center rep. That not all need to be treated equally, but we will always treat people fairly.
So this is our interview with Jim Feinstein of ENT Partners. And Jim, I want to thank you for joining us on the show today.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Daniel. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for joining us on the Healthcare CEO Show. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform for more insights from the top. Until next time, lead boldly and care deeply. See you on the next episode.